textbook example of what I wrote about in the shock doctrine, exploiting and intensifying that atmosphere of emergency to push pro-corporate policies and to do what a lot of people would have liked to do otherwise, even without any kind of crisis. I mentioned that New Orleans has the most privatized school system, the highest use of charter schools. After that comes Detroit. Flint and Grand Rapids are both in the top 10. And I always remember after Katrina, when there were these images of the lower Ninth Ward areas that were just hammered by Katrina, I remember, I think it was Michael Moore saying, that's what Flint looks like now, without a disaster. The disaster is capitalism. Forget disaster capitalism. So it's gotten a lot worse since the financial crisis in 2008 with the debt offloaded onto municipalities. And we've seen these attacks on the public school system, on public lands, parks taken over, turned into golf courses in Benton Harbor. And then there is this moral travesty of the water cutoffs in Detroit and elsewhere. And many believe, as you know, that these cutoffs are the first stage of water privatization, that this balancing of the books is to get the public utilities ready for privatization, because nobody's going to want to buy a utility if it can't be profitable. And I've been reading in the last few days about what, reminding myself of what's been happening here. I was just struck so much by how many different fronts, particularly African American young people in the state, how many different fronts they are under attack. That their schools are being shut down and privatized. Some are losing their parks. Their lungs are under attack because so many of those schools are scandalously close to coal-fired power plants, and they're some of the most polluted neighborhoods in this country. And then some of these same homes are losing their water, which are creating a host of other health crises. And then, you look at the water crisis in Flint, which is just, unbelievable. And obviously this is, that thankfully what happened, the lead in the water in Flint, there has been action on that, and it's thankfully been reversed just recently as a result of really heroic community organizing. And this region is just so blessed to have some of the most inspiring grassroots, incredibly place-based organizing anywhere in this country that is just animated by this very, very deep love of place, a vision of the future that could be so much better. And I'm thinking of groups like the Coalition for Clean Water, the Detroit Water Brigade, the Detroit People's Water Board, the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. I mean, don't take this for granted, because this is really unique, and it's why so many people from across the country come to Detroit to study this kind of community organizing. And it would be a lot worse if it weren't for this kind of grassroots response and neighbors coming together and giving each other water, and this solidarity that is so moving. Now, all of this is intimately linked to climate change, because as water becomes more scarce, if we treat water as a commodity like any other, rather than a human right, as Michelle said, then we're going to see more and more of this kind of profiteering. And the other thing we've seen under emergency managers is the outsourcing of things like firefighting, treating that as another profit-making opportunities. And these are the workers who are on the front lines of climate change. Another example of climate injustice, what our response to climate change looks like if we don't change the system, if we don't actually confront this need for system change. We can see right now in California, which is in the 4th year of a devastating drought, as you all know. It's impacting the agricultural system in this entire country. And fire season should be over in California by now. It's not. These are some of the highest risk jobs. What a lot of people don't know is that a great many of the people fighting fires in California are actually prison inmates. Yep. 4,000 of the 10,000 state firefighters in California working for CAL FIRE are prison inmates. They get paid $2 a day. If they're actively fighting fires, they get paid $1 an hour. California does this because it saves them an estimated $1 billion a year. Now, California has criminally overcrowded prisons. The courts have ordered them to release prisoners because of criminal overcrowding. And there have actually been arguments made by the state in court that they cannot release prisoners because it would put their firefighting at risk. So this is what climate injustice looks like, and this is why we need climate justice. When I presented this book for the first time in Oakland, California a few months ago, I spoke with an organizer with a group called Movement Generation, and a guy named Quentin Sekofa, who is part of the food justice movement in the Bay Area. And he said this thing that has really stayed with me. He said, transition is inevitable, justice is not. Justice is not. So what we are seeing, with the water cutoffs, with the prison inmates fighting fires, with what we saw in New Orleans, is what climate injustice looks like, what the transition to a climate change world looks like if we don't put justice front and center. We don't need to go to the Cineplex to imagine it. We can see it in our own cities. The good news is that climate change, I think, has given us some of the strongest arguments we will ever have to fight for this kind of system change, to fight for responses to climate change that solve multiple problems at once. And we even have some large-scale examples of what this would look like. One of the most dramatic energy transitions, probably the most dramatic energy transitions taking place anywhere in the world, is in Germany. That collision between weak and neglected public sphere is not just about responding to the disasters. It's also that we need to invest in the public sphere in order to get off fossil fuel, right? So it's not just about dealing with the disasters, that we have to deal with those disasters with a strong public sector, whether it's firefighters or whether it's taking care of our levees. But we also need to invest in public transit, in a transformed energy grid, all of that, energy efficiency. Now in Germany, where neoliberalism, for historical reasons, has never been fully embraced, Germany brutally prescribes austerity on other countries, like Greece and Spain. But because of the Second World War and an awareness of what happens in Germany when things get bad economically, Germany, thank goodness, has never fully embraced this at home. They maintain a pretty sturdy social safety net in Germany for these historical reasons. And there is this willingness to take bold action. And after the Fukushima disaster, the very strong green movement in Germany, the very anti-nuclear movement in Germany, successfully pushed to accelerate the energy transition. So in a decade and a half, Germany went from getting almost none of its electricity from renewables to now getting 30% of its electricity from renewables. And the really exciting part, is that but this is Germany. I mean, what's scandalous about this is parts of the United States, like Florida, Arizona, are way behind that. This is Germany, dark, rainy, not very sunny place. They're getting 30%. In winter, in summer, they get more than 50% of their electricity from renewables. And much of it is decentralized, community-owned, and controlled. So the slogan in Germany is not just for energy transition, but for energy democracy. So in big cities and small towns, people have decided to reverse the privatization of their energy grids that happened in the 1990s and to take back local control over their energy grids and move to 100% renewable, because the private companies that took over their energy grids were not willing to do that transition fast enough. So they decided, just as people in Detroit are saying that water is a human right, that energy is also a human right, that clean energy is a human right, and it is a commons. And that is the basis of the transformation in Germany. And this is, like I said, it's called remunicipalization, reversing those privatizations, has happened in hundreds of German cities, including big cities like Hamburg. So I think we are in a moment where we could see a very rapid transition. And I say that because the problem with climate change is that this is a crisis that plays out in slow motion, even though I don't think humanity has ever faced an existential crisis like this. The only thing you could compare it to is the nuclear threat, but the nuclear threat was slightly different in the sense that something had to go wrong in order to bring that on, whereas, as I said before, climate change happens if we just keep on keeping on. We don't actually have to do anything for this to be our future. So despite the fact that this is absolutely dire, it doesn't command our attention as an emergency. So it doesn't have that shock to a transformation in the same way that, for instance, the market crash of 1929 ended up being the shock that transformed the US economy and built much of the social safety net. I think climate change could be that kind of catalyst, but you have to have the right conditions for it, and those conditions haven't really been in place until now. So I think there are three factors that make this a really unique moment, that means that the stars are aligning for that kind of a justice-based transition. One is the fact that the price of oil in the past year has collapsed. And this is a true shock. It's a true shock for the market. You can ask any energy trader and they will explain that going from $150 a barrel, which is what oil was at its high, to $39 a barrel, which is what it's been at its low, is a very, very shocking change. It is just changing the energy map in ways that we don't fully understand. But it's already taking a political toll. Just in the past few months, two heads of state that bet their respective countries on fossil fuels have lost their jobs. One is Tony Abbott in Australia, who bet his country's fortune on coal and was just ousted about a month ago. And he very famously cut the ribbon at a massive new coal mine and said that coal was good for humanity. It seems that people don't agree. And in my country, in Canada, we've just booted our Prime Minister. So this drop in this price shock creates the conditions for some pretty bold policy. I'm not saying that just because the price of oil is down, everything's going to be fine. That's not the case at all. In fact, when the price of oil goes down, that can have all kinds of negative impacts. It encourages people to burn more oil because it's cheaper. But on the other hand, when oil is $100 a barrel, it is harder to do something we badly need to do, which is tax it. We need a carbon tax. It needs to be a progressive carbon tax so that low-income earners get more back than they pay in increased taxes, and higher-income earners bear the brunt of the tax. But we need a carbon tax. And when the price of oil is down, that creates the conditions where we could actually do it. Once again, it's not inevitable, but it creates a condition where we could fight for it and actually win in a way that was pretty much unthinkable a year from now. The other thing is that we have been living this age of extreme energy, right? Where we've been opening up new fossil fuel frontiers like the Alberta tar sands, like natural gas fracking, Arctic drilling, all of this, deep water drilling, all of this, in addition to it being much higher risk from an environmental perspective, it's also really expensive. When the price of oil is as low as it is right now, that creates a disincentive to go into these new carbon frontiers. Now, we're starting to see the impacts of this. If it were just a temporary price shock, I think industry could be counted on to just wait it out. They know that what goes down will go back up eventually, and they would probably just hang steady there. But there is another factor, and this is the second major reason after the price shock why I think we are in a pretty good transition to fight for this kind of transition that I'm talking about, and that is that the climate movement, and in particular the climate justice movement, is on a roll. 6 months ago, do you guys remember those images of the Shell's Arctic drilling rig in Seattle? Made the mistake of going, you know what we'll do? We'll stop in Seattle on our way to the Arctic. What could possibly go wrong? And you know, they were surrounded by 500 kayaktivists, which is a new word. Of that protest, and they surrounded the rig, and in Portland, where they also made a stop, they rappelled off the bridge to try to block Shell's icebreaker. And you know, at the time, they didn't actually stop Shell from going up to the Arctic, but a few months later, Shell announced that they were pulling out of the Arctic for the foreseeable future. Of these two factors. One, the profits are lower, it's more expensive, and these movements are there, giving them a very, very tough time. And obviously, it's not just Arctic drilling, it's every tar sands pipeline, it's every liquid natural gas terminal, it's every coal export terminal, it's oil trains, it's every new piece of fossil fuel infrastructure is facing this kind of resistance. So, in addition to that, we also have the rise of